Hello, I'm Steve McCauley, and today we're going to look at some of the key challenges facing supply chain management. Now, joining me in the studio today is Professor Martin Christopher. Now, Martin, you're a Emeritus Professor of Logistics and Marketing. You've been in the game a long time. You've seen a lot of changes in supply chain management. Tell me about some of today's challenges and how we've arrived at that.
Yes, well, I think it's interesting to reflect on even the origins of the idea of supply chain management, because it's not actually that old as an idea. I think we can trace it back maybe 25, 30 years. And I think in that time there's been a significant change, because I guess we were really focused primarily on the supply chain as a sort of opportunity for reducing cost. And clearly we still are, and particularly in today's economic climate, cost is critical. But that really was, I think, the main sort of driver in many companies of trying to improve their supply chain. Today, I think I see a change. I think I see a recognition that the supply chain isn't just about cost. It's actually about how we create and deliver value for customers. And as such, it means it's a mechanism for enabling us to differentiate ourselves, to gain competitive advantage. The idea that we compete now as a supply chain rather than as an individual business. I think that perhaps is one of the sort of major differences. And it's shaping our thinking now about how we want to work with partners in the supply chain, about the sourcing arrangements that we make. And it's widened, I think, the whole sort of perspective of what we mean by supply chain management.
Now, if we look ahead, as opposed to looking back, if you like, in the current, what do you see as the key challenges that supply chain is going to face over the coming years?
Well, I think we're right in the middle at the moment of a major sort of period of turbulence, and none of us are sure how long that's going to continue. My view is that this turbulence, this volatility is here for some time. And to me, that means that the biggest challenge is really how do you manage a supply chain in an era of uncertainty, of constant sort of change in the wider business environment. Because if you think about it, in the past, most of our sort of ways of working were based upon relative stability in the wider world. So we forecast. Most of our sort of businesses have been forecast driven. You plan ahead, you build inventory, and that's fine. But of course, once we enter this period which we're in at this moment, forecasting becomes much, much more difficult. Who knows what next week even is going to bring, not just on the demand side, but also on the supply side. I think we're into a period now where we're going to have to become much more demand-driven, not forecast-driven, driven by events as they happen. Now, to do that requires a much higher level of agility and flexibility. It's okay, if you can plan 4 or 5 months ahead, you can sort of focus on efficiencies, and you can sort of choose to sort of do things in the most sort of the way that best utilizes your capacity and so on. You can plan all these things. On the other hand, in the environment that we're looking at today, you can't do that. So what we're looking at, I think, increasingly is how do you change the organization and also to the relationships with key suppliers, with key distributors, key customers, to enable that supply chain to become much more flexible. And I think that's where the future focus really is going to be. It's going to be on how we sort of move away from the sort of traditional focus, which is more on efficiencies, and as I say, on forecasts and planning, to something which is much more about responding to events as they happen.
Now, one of the areas that you've looked at, and it is reflected in your job title, is marketing and supply chain and logistics. Now, you marry the two together. I use the term demand chain. Can you expand on how on earth the two do come together? I mean, in some stereotypical way, some people see marketing out there at one end and logistics and supply chain at the other end, and there the twain shall meet.
Yeah, I think you've put your finger on it. I mean, because if we look at most organisation charts, The marketing department is quite separate from logistics and distribution and procurement. It may even be in different buildings, could even be in different geographical locations. So often limited sort of connection. And yet, if you think about it, that's a very artificial division to make, because on the one hand, you've got the sort of demand creation activities, which we associate with marketing, and on the other hand, we've got sort of demand fulfillment, which we might associate more with supply chain and logistics. But I think today what we're seeing is that these things are connected now. I mentioned earlier that we increasingly differentiate ourselves through our supply chains. And what I mean by that is that I've got a supply chain, for instance, that's more responsive, more agile. I've got a supply chain that's capable of being able to customize the solution the way you want it. It's not rigid. So the supply chain is now actually becoming part of our sort of marketing capability. And I actually think that if we look at the successful businesses in most sectors, it's interesting. You can actually look at those companies and you can say, not only have they got great products, but they've got a great supply chain that supports it. I mean, we're all familiar with the Dells of this world, the Apple computers of this world, the Walmarts and so forth, the Zaras. And when you look at each of these examples, it's not just a great value proposition that they offer. It's a set of supply chain processes that are very closely connected to that overall value proposition. So that's what I think, marketing and logistics and supply chain really are just part and parcel of the same sort of value creation, value delivery mechanism.
So if you were to leave top managers in particular and supply chain managers with a key message, what would you say?
I would say that now is the time, particularly given the current uncertainty, to be really thinking ahead about what should the supply chain of the future look like in your business. I don't think we can have business as usual, so to speak, continuing for all time into the future. We need to start to question our whole sort of design of our supply chains. As you know, there's been over the last 20 years a big move to offshore manufacturing, offshore sourcing, and in many cases we've extended the supply chain and sometimes we've actually lost control of it. Now, I'm not against offshore sourcing, offshore manufacturing, but what I'm saying is I do really think we need to step back, look at our strategy in terms of what do we want to do as a business and what's the value we want to create and deliver, and then say, okay, what sort of supply chain architecture is best able to do that, particularly in these turbulent sort of times. So my advice would really be to say, okay, now is a good time to be really reviewing the way we look at our supply chains, the way we design them.
That's a key message to leave us on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.